Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Family Business Learning Community. For the guests with us this morning, I'm Sally Durstein, and I lead our team here at the Family Business Center. And while I miss seeing you all face-to-face, I'm very grateful that technology provides a way for us to continue to connect the learning community. Well, over the last 2 months, we produced a series of webinars on coping with COVID. So I'd like to give a shout out to our educational sponsors who provided the critical input at these webinars, and they continue to stay on top of legislation so that we can make wise decisions. And Karen keeps our COVID resource page updated, or you can feel free to contact our sponsors directly. So thank you again, they're all represented here on this screen. Well, our mission, again for guests, this has been our mission for over 30 years, and it's to guide business families so they flourish as individuals, as families, and as enterprises. And that's very important to me. And this next slide actually shows our team flourishing as we're doing a service project at Mennonite Resource Center just this past February. So I'm really proud how we work together in ways that we can flourish so we can also help business families flourish. And hey team, you're all on here. Well, today's topic is leadership agility. And I've had the privilege over the past 28 years to work with and learn from hundreds of remarkable leaders. And in a family business, leadership agility isn't optional. It's a requirement due to the extraordinary complexity that is inherent in family businesses. So this graphic depicts the complexity. It's the world you live in, the world I grew up in. 3 very different systems, family and ownership, with different and competing needs, goals, and values. Many of you operate every day in more than one of these roles. You live in those overlaps, which is ripe for confusion and conflict. And this black middle part we all have come to know, which are the employed family owners. That's just a real vortex for potential conflict. So understanding boundaries is critical. It's a constant discernment. You know, how and when am I CEO, dad, mom? How and when am I a parent, majority leader, and a board director? And that's how we did, Jared and I did something on boundaries just 2 weeks ago. So this depicts our 5-mountain model. Most of you have seen this, and you're working intentionally to develop your 5-mountain teams and structures. Families that succeed over the generations attend to the continuous development of these mountains and organizational structures, and also learning how to separate their roles. So key in is self-awareness, openness, and the courage to lean into very uncomfortable and difficult conversations. And Greg will talk about some of this. So today's topic, leadership is so important because we need leadership in all of these 5 mountains. And our theme for this year, building emotional agility or emotional literacy. There's a lot of overlap between emotional and leadership agility. So which is one of the reasons that I invited Greg to present today. So a little bit about Greg. I met Greg about 15 years ago through the Family Business Alliance Group, an annual gathering of university-based family business forum directors across the nation. Now, Greg was there as the founder and director of Stetson University's Family Enterprise Center. That's located in Florida, where Greg was also the director of their executive program. So there was an immediate affinity that I felt with Greg for several reasons. One is I was the only non-university based forum director because we're business-based as a consulting firm. And in addition to Greg's role at Stetson, he also had founded his own consulting firm. So we had that, and then we have just very similar philosophies around developing leadership capacity in all members, in the whole family, you know, building family muscle. We also share a common experience of working with our fathers, who happen to also be our mentors and heroes. And then lastly, we both really focus on developing the rising generation, helping them develop internal authority and external credibility. So in 2007, I believe it was, I invited Greg to speak on that topic, which is one of his books, When Your Parents Sign the Paychecks. Some of you may remember Greg from that. So Greg, I'm delighted you accepted, again, the invitation to speak today. So could you tell us a little more about your background and how you ended up working so intimately with family businesses?
Sure. Thanks, Sally. And it's an honor to be back here. And I want to thank you and Jared for helping tailor and make this more accessible to everybody at the Delaware Valley community. And it's fun to be here with Robert. And you're right. I think we have always been kindred souls and think a great deal alike, and probably put as much emphasis on the family development as anybody in the field. So a little bit of my background, I sort of wear 4 hats when it comes to family business. As Sally said, I was a professor at Stetson for 27 years, led the center. We created the first major, and I was proud. We did a lot of coaching, a lot of career development, internships. They even did consulting in the capstone class. Very hands-on and practical kind of program. I was also the leader of our executive MBA that focused on the leadership that we'll talk about today. The second hat I wear is I'm an owner in my family's business. So my dad's 86, still highly involved. And I'm an owner and informal advisor to that business. The third hat is I've been a consultant and coach to family businesses, family offices for over 20 years. And then I write and speak a little bit. So the majority of my professional and personal life is focused around family business. And I have just tremendous respect for what family businesses do, what they bring to this country, and when done right, how much they can improve the business.
Thanks, Greg. And now, Jared, could you introduce us to Robert?
Yeah, so we wanted to have some real practical flesh and blood examples of some of the stuff we're talking about today. So we invited Robert Berge from Berge's Electric to join us here. And, you know, thinking of our mountains, he's on the management mountain, the shareholder mountain, the board mountain as the G3 president, shareholder, and then as the board chair as well. So that has some complexities there. And I did a little bit of digging, Robert, and Berge's Electric has been a member of our center here since 1995. So this is your 25th anniversary. So congratulations on that. Your prize is you get to be on our webinar this morning, which I know you love being part of the spotlight. I can tell through all of our prep for this. So, and also, you know, Robert has been, which is what led to inviting him here, has been part of our peer group. I looked that up as well. Since 2009, we have our various leadership labs. We have one for women in family business, a rising gen, and then a leading gen kind of C-suite executive group. And Robert's been part of that for 11 years now, and I've been honored to lead that group for the past 5 years. And Robert and I just having lots of discussions and Robert's discussions with the group, when this topic of leadership agility came up, you know, a lot of the circumstances and situations that he's faced over the last handful of years really exemplified and modeled this agility. So, Robert, we'll have you chime in a little bit more about your background and some of the things you've are facing here in a little bit. But Robert may be jumping in throughout early on. So we wanted to give an introduction to him, and then later on, we're going to focus a little time on him. So thanks, Robert, for being on. Really appreciate it.
And then also questions, just a word that you can submit your questions. We'll try to get to them at the end of the program.
And if you can submit those, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You may have to tap around if you're on your mobile device to get to it. If you're on a desktop, it'll just come up. But if you can submit through that Q&A rather than like the text or chat box, that would help us keep track of that. And if you submit it, you may not hear from us right away. That's okay. We did get it. Sally will be facilitating that later on, but you can ask it at any point.
Okay, so let's roll forward here. So Greg, let's start off with, do you believe that leadership skills and competencies in a family business are different than those needed in other companies?
You know, at a high level, I think leadership is good leadership. But as we all know, and you know, your one slide showed, in a family, it's more complex. It can be better, but in my experience, it's never simpler. So you may go from a board meeting with the owners, including independents, to talking about your nephew isn't performing as an employee, to a family council meeting talking about grandma's legacy. So I think every family business leader needs a greater capacity And I mean that in terms of emotions, strategy, and just their own self-management. And the agility to say, what style or gear should I be in? So Sally, if I can build on that on this next slide. So my work, and I think again, this resonates so much with what Delaware Valley is doing. You know, the FFI Goodman study was a landmark study that came out, I believe, 6 or 7 years ago. It went across the United Nations, across the US, across industry, second generation and older. And to me, at least, to help redefine my thinking, because it found out the average family business in that survey had changed their core business 2.1 times. And it just said, maybe something's going on here. I think if that data is 8, 9, approaching 10 years old, maybe that's trending up to 2.5 times. And my hunch is with the coronavirus, we're moving towards 3 times. So imagine the implications if the average family business changes their core business 3 times over the lifetime of the business. I think that says a couple things. One, the industry you're in may change. Imagine how meat packing has to change, airlines have to change. Fundamental, quick, disruptive changes. Or imagine you changing industry. You know, my family's looked at selling our business for, I think, all the right reasons. I wouldn't consider that a failure if it's done strategically and for the right reasons. So all the work I do with families now, I'm looking to develop this mindset that says we're a family that deploys our finances, our talent, our resources, our relationship into opportunities that align with who we are. And those opportunities could be a family office, a family foundation, or for-profit businesses. But there's an alignment that has never probably been as explicit as it is in this current situation. I think if you accept that premise, then 2 things, and there are 2 words you're going to hear me talk about a lot today. Then the family has to develop their capacity. As I mentioned, the emotional capacity, the emotional intelligence that Dan Goldman talks about. Who am I? How do I show up? You know, all the things talked about in the emotional agility book. How do I empathize with my family on a deeper level? How do I show my employees I'm looking out for them? The strategic level. Is this a problem to solve immediately? Is this a systemic issue we have to develop a strategy for? Or even more subtly, is this a cultural issue that I have to influence and shape over the long run? And then the agility, you know, in the EMBA, one of the mantras was, what gear should I be in? Meaning, when I walk into this meeting, should I be advocating? Should I be more accommodating? Should I show a lot of empathy? That mindfulness of choosing the style or gear that works best is as important as having the capacity itself.
Great. Well, Greg, what are your views on leadership agility in the face of all this complexity, the uncertainty around emotional, social, and economic times?
You know, I think it's more necessary than ever. I have about 13 to 15 leaders I'm coaching. And I think the good ones are trying to say, how do I still work on my leadership because it's more important? I think the risk is a lot of people say, I'm just going to put my head down, deal with the next task and not worry about it. But I think people want certainty, and you probably can't provide certainty, but you can provide vision, you can provide reassurance. You know, one client I have, the family came together and did 2 things, said, we're going to ensure bonuses for the employees, even if it comes out of the family money. And in a month, they created a foundation to help employees' families who are struggling. You see some of the best come out in leaders, and unfortunately, some of the worst at times. I think don't neglect, you know, it's like working out. We often tend to neglect it when we need it most. Don't give up your workout practice, because you see this is going on for weeks and now months. Putting the leadership on hold is a bad idea.
So, Greg, how does awareness increase effectiveness and trust in leadership?
Oh, great question, Sally. You know, I believe it all starts with awareness. You can't work on something until you're aware of it. So if you're not aware of what your strengths are, your weaknesses, or even your blind spots. You know, I think of someone I was coaching and he said, I have no blind spots. And after an hour, we'd come up with 3 and he said, that's enough for today. You know, if you're in a meeting and you think, boy, nobody in this meeting is really paying attention to me, they seem distracted. And I walk out and you say, Greg, you've got lettuce in your teeth. I could have easily fixed that if I had known it. But you see, that's what everybody's looking at. You know, a wonderful colleague of mine who works in this field said, we are all professional boss watchers. So everybody knows if Sally has that second cup of coffee, that means she's not in a good mood, or if Greg does this, it means that. So you can't hide it. You know, one of the challenges I wanted to share with your members who are listening is feedback so important. Ask 3, 5, 7 people you know for 3 words. How do I show up on a good day? Generous, responsible, witty. And 3 words for how do I show up on a bad day? Impatient, aloof, rigid. And most people, when they do this, they're surprised to find everybody is able to read me on a bad day. And so then it becomes, how do I work with that? We all have bad days, especially now. How do I take some ownership for that? Maybe ask for some forgiveness or feedback or compassion, but don't ignore it. So as you become more aware, you start to make better choices. One quick example on that, someone I worked with who had 3 brothers, he was one of 4 brothers, and a management team, learned he was incredibly good at advocating, but he overused that gear. So in a meeting, he would just wear everybody down. They would leave the meeting saying, I finally had to say yes, but I'm not really buying in. He thought they had buy-in. He didn't see follow through, so it created a big trust gap. As he came to see that he overused that gear, that was a pattern, not a choice. He worked very hard to make it more of a choice, and it changed. He said it changed his life. It changed the relationship with his brothers. It changed the relationship with his management team, and even changed the relationship at home. So until you're aware of something, you can't work on it. If you work on it, you can become far more effective.
So you work with lots of leaders. How can we best manage during these weeks of prolonged uncertainty and increased stress?
Oh, great question. You know, I think one is realizing there is an ambient stress. There is an ongoing stress for all of us. So some of the most grounded people I know even say about once a week, this just gets to them. So I think reining down expectations a little bit, showing up with compassion. So some of the good leaders I know are just having check-in calls, listening to people. You know, under stress, we tend to go to our strength, and a lot of us are great problem solvers. If Jared comes to me hypothetically and he's just stressed about his child learning at home or something, don't fix that. Listen. And you know, in research, you see men tend to want to fix everything. I worked for 10 years with a woman who was also a couples therapist. She said virtually every couple that ever came in to see her, the wife said, I wish he would just listen and not solve my problems. So in the handout that we'll make available to everyone afterwards, at the end, there's 2 pages on feedback, advice, and support, and when to use each. And one tip is don't use advice unless you ask for permission, and don't give advice unless you have some experience or expertise. I have a friend who I've seen advise pregnant women at parties on how they should handle their pregnancy. Wrong gear. I am certain he has never been pregnant, you know.
So Greg, tell us about your leadership agility, the 4 agilities. Talk to us about that.
Good. Jared, can we pull up the first slide on that, please? So leadership agility is the model that I've been using for about 8 years with all my clients, both coaching and consulting. I actually was exposed to it when I took over the executive MBA. So it was developed studying 800 leaders in business, what they actually do, and the stages they evolve through. So the next few slides are really a semester-long EMBA course that I've tried to simplify. So it says, as leaders develop, these 4 agilities you see there start to develop and deepen, and they do two things. They integrate and they show up closer to the present moment. So let me give you a quick example. I was in a meeting with a pretty evolved colleague of mine. We were planning a workshop, and all of a sudden he said, Greg, something you just said triggered something in me. So self-awareness in the moment. You know, I was kind of shocked. I thought maybe I'd have offended him. He saw my reaction. He said, it's nothing you did. It is just some emotional baggage I have on this topic. So empathy in the present moment. Then he said, Greg, I think if we can take about 5 minutes, let me debrief on this. I can get my attention back into the meeting. So we didn't get to innovation in this example, but I think you see in the moment, here's somebody who was able to be self-aware, empathize, and frame. A different person might have gotten upset, got upset with me, been distracted, taken a day to realize what was going on. So that bringing these skills into the present moment is just transformative. So let me go through each of the four briefly. So self-awareness, and again, this all resonates with everything I know about Delaware Valley and Sally and the Emotional Agility book. You know, self-awareness is endless. You know your Myers-Briggs type, you know your birth order. Hopefully you're getting feedback, you're giving feedback. You may have a reflective practice. You know, who are you and what do you bring to the equation? I think it was Nietzsche said, ultimately, the only thing we experience is ourself. You know, to go a little deep on this, we tend to live the narrative in our head more than reality. One of the experts in this field said, the more you develop vertically, the more you develop in this model, the closer you live to reality. And I thought that was a great way of looking at it. Empathy. Do you care for people? And during this crisis, this one's just vital. You're asking people to, you know, devote time, adapt to new situations, deal with stress, maybe even put their health at risk. They have to know you care. They have to feel heard. You know, a great mantra is people don't listen till they feel heard. And that, again, that problem solving can get in the way of that. There's a time for problem solving, but that's not your only gear. Framing. If I had 3 pieces of feedback, one would be work on your feedback for the audience. 2, framing. I just talked to a woman yesterday who is in a group that I work with twice a year, and she said the most important thing she's gotten out of our work is framing. So in the handout, you'll have 2 short articles on how to frame, but framing is what's the essence of this decision or opportunity? How many times are you in a meeting and there's, say, 4 people and you feel like we're having 3 meetings and nobody really is talking about the same thing, and at the end you hear that dreaded phrase, well, I guess we need another meeting. My father, who is, like Sally said, a mentor to me, was an inspiration for the character book. He says the meeting is over before the meeting. Meaning if it's a well-prepared meeting, it's probably going to be a great meeting. If the meeting starts when you all sit down, it's usually a setup. I'll give you a real quick example. We worked with a family that had a family office of 6 siblings. I'm sorry, a family council of 6 siblings. For years, they had not wanted a leader. They wanted to be very egalitarian. They finally decided they need a leader. They had framed it in terms of who of the 6 had the most expertise. We looked at it and said, let's consider reframing it in terms of family dynamics between the 6. Because the one with the expertise tended to push and drive. One other sibling did that. The other 4 tended to slow them down, and they got stuck in this pattern of push-pull. When we put one of the 4 more leaning backs in as leader, it changed all the dynamics, which I won't go into, but in 1 year, they agreed they made more progress in the last 6. Framing is everything. So that'd be a second challenge I'd have. And last is innovation, which I'm in an innovation group that I find incredibly helpful, but it basically is creating value from change. And I would say there are 2 types. There's incremental, which is how do we make the current system better and more efficient? And that's happening faster and faster. You know, your software updates every day now. And then there's breakthrough or transformative innovation, which is also happening. How do we go from taxi cabs to Uber, hotels to Airbnb? As I mentioned, my guess is the meatpacking industry, the airlines are going to have breakthrough innovation in the next 6 months. That takes time. You know, we'll get to management and leadership, but generally I think managers work real hard on the incremental. Leaders have to work on the breakthrough, and the breakthrough takes space, white space to think. So these are the 4 agilities. Jared, if we can go to the next slide. So how do you develop these? I want to go to the handout. So the handout has 1 email. You know, for the last 6 emails, we've been sending out emails to our stakeholders, 1 on leadership agility, 1 each on these 4 agilities, and 1 on management and leadership. So it's sort of a nice follow-up for concrete tips and articles on how to develop this if you're interested. Now you see here, we put character in the middle, and that's been our addition. I think you need a moral, spiritual, or values-based compass for this work. So many of my clients have been flattered, have asked us to bring in the character book. We've had clients put their religious or spiritual heritage in there. And I think it's just a nice rudder or anchor for this kind of work. Again, I won't go through all these. I would say feedback. the Center for Creative Leadership, which is often ranked in the top 3 leadership programs in the world, says the more you move up in any organization, your biggest risk to derail your career is lack of objective feedback. Families, I think, value harmony so much, it's even more of a risk. So if you only took one thing from today, it's work on feedback. And there's, in the resources slide that we'll get to, there's a booklet from CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership. In the handout, there's a page on how to give feedback, a format that I think really works. So if you did nothing else but tried to bring that into your culture, it would help your leadership, your family, and your enterprises. Sally, unless you have a question, next slide. The stages. So this, I hope, gives everyone a bit of a roadmap. So there are predictable stages leaders go through. You can't skip a stage. There's no magic pill I know of. But you can accelerate your development. In the executive MBA, which was 18 months, we found the average student, and some of these students were 60, so they were older and in leadership positions, moved up half a stage, some moved up even a stage, which is gigantic development. Okay, so let me go through this model with a couple opening comments. One, you see under stress, and as I mentioned, we're all under stress. We tend to downshift to the lower stage unintentionally, so be aware of that. A coaching client I have said, all I want to do is the next task. That's probably a good stress management technique for a short period, but that's not leading. So if you're a numbers person, you'll probably notice these numbers add up to about 85%. And that's because there's a stage before expert that most of us get through before we get out of school. I won't talk about that. There are 2 brief stages above catalyst that constitute a total of 5%. But 85% of us have one of these 3 stages as our home base. Remember the terms capacity and agility. So let me use a brief analogy before I start into this. Transportation. When we're born, we all crawl, we all walk. Most of us ride a bike. Most of us drive a car. Some of us might even become pilots, and a very select few become astronauts. That's the capacity for transportation, right? But the pilot doesn't take the plane to the corner grocery store. The agility is what mode of transportation. I'll walk to the neighbors, I'll ride a bike to the park, I'll take a car to downtown, and I'll fly to California. That's how those 2 play out. So this is all about capacity and agility. So let me use a hypothetical. Let's say Sally and I are siblings. So my condolences for the example, Sally. And we have 2 other siblings. So there's 4 siblings in G2. Between the 4 of us, let's assume we have 12 cousins, 12 people in G3. So Sally calls me and says, Greg, can you hire my daughter, Ruth? She's a working single mom who just got laid off because of the coronavirus. Let's imagine I'm an expert where about 45% of us show up. My mindset is I'm the guy that solves problems. I'm in charge of our family business. I want to help my sister. So these 4 agilities aren't real developed. They're not available in the present moment. They might sort of percolate up after the phone call. But in the phone call, I'm trying to solve this problem as quickly as I can. So I like Sally. I respect her daughter. I know she's a single mom. I say, have her come in tomorrow and we'll find her a job. Boom. Next problem. To overstate this a little bit, the mindset is like the video game Whack-A-Mole, where all day long problems come up and you have to solve them quickly. So that's good. There's a lot of problems. Solving them is great, but that's a somewhat limited capacity. You tend to see things as if I'm right and Sally disagrees with me, then she must be wrong. So shades of gray, differing perspectives don't come easily at this stage. Let's reboot the example. So same facts, but Sally calls me and now I'm an achiever. This is where just over 1/3 of us get to. That's stepping back and awareness we talked about. So these 4 agilities are a little more available. They're a little more integrated, and I can see the system. So Sally calls, and I may ask her about how did she get laid off, your daughter? How are you doing? I may be somewhat aware that Sally and I have some trust issues, so I may want to slow down, make sure she feels heard. But because I can see the system, I say, Sally, I want to help Ruth. But I'm concerned that if there's 12 cousins, especially with the unemployment so high, I don't want to make this a one-off. I don't want to set a precedent that creates frustration for the cousins and our siblings. So what if we got the 4 siblings together and developed a strategy to help protect the integrity of the business and the family? You know, outside experience, credentials, all the things Delaware Valley has been telling us about. And she says, oh, okay, you know, and we get off the phone. About 2 hours later, I think, you know what, maybe there's an opportunity to hire Ruth on a temporary basis or give her a loan or something. I probably overlooked that this poor single mom's out of work. So that would come to me probably, but not during the phone call. But anyway, the family employment policy crafted with the 4 siblings, I think we would agree 2 things. It's not as efficient. Ruth or Sally and I can't do that on the phone. But I think most people would agree it's more effective than 12 one-off decisions that would probably result in chaos and frustration and issues. So let's reboot it one more time, and let's assume I'm a catalyst. And this is where 5% of leaders get to. And again, remember, there's 2 stages above this. This is a stage, and why I adopted this model for family business is I've let go of my attachment to having to be the leader. And in our preparation, I think Robert has done some of this work. You can do it if you need to step up and be in charge, but you're also at a point in your life and your development where you can let the team do it, or your successor do it, or someone else do it. You don't have to be the guy, and I put guy in quotes, meaning man or woman. So let's say Sally calls me, and I lean into this a little bit because I know we've had some trust issues, and I slow down. I even get my administrative assistant to cancel my next call. And I listen to her and I validate her feelings. How, you know, your grandchild's at risk now because your daughter's out of work. And so there's a little more empathy. There's a little more, how'd she get laid off? What's she going to do? Does she have savings? And then I frame it and say, you know, maybe we could create some kind of safety net for her. Maybe it's a temporary job. Maybe it's a loan from the family. Let's take care of your daughter and her child. But I want to talk a little more, Sally. I think there's an opportunity here. I could solve this problem. You know, I think we need some kind of strategy, but I think the real opportunity here, Sally, is we can evolve the culture of the 12 cousins. They have always been loyal, good family members, but they're all in their 20s. They're all starting careers. What if we had them work together with someone from Delaware Valley to craft a family employment policy? So they were now acting as engaged professionals. You know, if we give them the policy, we're kind of the parents telling the kids what to do. If they say, we've thought through, do I have to have outside work? Can my spouse work here? Do I have to work for a family member? Then they're creating a culture of engaged professionals, which is what we want. Now, we can't do that on the phone with Sally and I. It'll probably take even longer, but I think you can see it has the potential to be transformative. Now, I love Peter Drucker's phrase, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. So top leaders think about culture. Not always. Again, the astronaut doesn't take the shuttle to the corner store, but top leaders have the capacity to say, is this an opportunity to shape and influence the culture? So Sally, how did I do it? That's a semester-long EMBA course in just a few minutes.
Spot on. Made sense. And we'll see if it makes sense if there's other questions later on around that. Greg.
Good. It's an exciting model. I find it gives people a roadmap, and it's a great vehicle to coach through. So if we can jump to the next slide, if you don't mind, Jared. Ways to develop this. This is also in your handout. I'm not going to read each of these. It's essentially become part of a learning community like Delaware Valley. Work with people who have a growth mindset. Stretch yourself. Go to new situations. You know, the innovation group I'm in, the founder said, spend 25% of your professional time outside your field. Go learn how whales sing. Go do a meditation retreat. Don't do the same thing the same way all the time. You know, it's like, I like the analogy of working out. If I can pick on Jared, if he walked out of the gym, I said, how was your workout? And he said, you know, it was great. I didn't sweat or stretch at all. It wasn't a good workout. If you're not stretching, you know. So the other mantra in the MBA was, how do I get comfortable with being uncomfortable? Meaning, how do I, you know, just this last week, I looked at my Myers-Briggs, and under stress, I tend to be impatient. So I've had to work on that a little more. It often feels to me everyone's moving in slow motion, and I'm aware enough to realize they're not. That's my stuff. You know, so a little humility. We all have our stuff. How do we own it and work on it? Good. Next slide, if you don't mind, Jared.
Yeah,
Sally?
you talk a little bit, you differentiate between, leaders and managers. So tell us a little bit about how you think and also the skills that are required of both.
Good. And if it's okay, Robert, after I go through these, I'd love to ask you to share some of your thoughts and feelings. So different people can slice this differently, but this is based on Kotter's work from Harvard. It's pretty classical work. And even if you disagree with the wordsmithing, I think the concept's really helpful. In the handout, you have a management and leadership assessment to take. It only takes 10 minutes or so. It's a wonderful device. But here's the takeaway in my mind. Leadership is setting a vision. It is making the system different, changing it to be more effective. Okay, and it's shaping the culture. One of my mentors, I've never worked with the family, is Jim Ethier, the retired chair of Bush Brothers. He took a regional cannery into one of the most innovative food companies in the world. Okay, and they make beans, which I think are a week younger than dirt. He works on culture. He has said to me that as chairman of the board, his focus was culture, management did strategy. So it's that visionary mark on the hill, trust me, here's where we're going. Okay, it's hard. You also need management. Management says, I'm going to take that vision and create the dashboard. How do we measure it? How do we train for it? How do we recruit for it? How do we assess it? It's all got to be there. You need management. But here's what I want people listening to take away. Research shows, and my experience echoes this, most organizations are overmanaged and underled. So I did a half-day workshop on this exact topic to roughly 50 business owners in New Orleans. At the end, all but 3 said they were overmanaging and underleading. Couple that with the stress of the coronavirus, my sense is people find doing the next task, and that may be essential for a while, but we need leadership. People need to know what's next. They need to know you're thinking about a vision. The number one reason people leave a job, according to the Gallup organization, is a bad boss. So you can't provide certainty, but you can provide direction. You have to communicate. Patrick Lencioni, who wrote some great work on teams, I just read of one of his books, and he said people need to hear something 7 times before they internalize it. I got to believe that number is not lower now under all the stress. So communicate, 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 and listen, listen, listen. If we go to the next slide, and then after I go through it, I'll ask Robert to comment. Again, here's a little more detail, and in your handout, you have even more detail. Leaders say, here's the mark on the hill. We're going to change our industry this way. Let's get alignment. Let's listen to people, get buy-in. Okay, let's show them the potential. Let's show them their role. It's kind of inspirational. And it's often changing the culture. Managers say, I'm going to take that vision and make a system around it that makes it work more efficiently and assess it and measure it. The risk too much leadership would lead to chaos and turmoil. The risk with management is too much management is we have the most efficient Blockbuster store that's about to go out of business. You need a balance. And again, research shows, my experience shows, and under this current stress, my sense is most people are leading into management. So another challenge to your listeners, take the 2-page assessment on management and leadership, assess how are you allocating your time and energy, and then ask, maybe with your managers and leaders in the organization, is that the balance we need right now? Robert, any comments, rebuttals?
Yes, well, it's been great for me to sit in and listen. I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I think that's what's been great about, learning in the Delaware Valley Family Business Center community too, as we've learned from experts and also from each other's family businesses. It's been great. I am really not one to sit still. I'm interested in changing the status quo. I guess that's just always been how I've been wired. And I think when you talk about leaders and managers, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but I think you need to be somewhat engaged at what you're doing, and then you can work into a management position. And if you're really good at that and want to continue to develop yourself and what your company needs, then I think you can switch into leadership. But I think not all managers are good leaders, and not all technicians are good managers. So, you know, how that all comes about, maybe by what the company needs or what I think I want to grow and become, you know, maybe it's some kind of a mix of other things, the people I'm around, how I'm influenced by them, the books I'm reading.
Robert, I think that's a great point. You know, I have a brother who is a absolutely brilliant manager. He's really, really good at it. I've seen him transform teams. I would not call him visionary. You know, I would say his leadership he's got some good leadership skills, but his gift, his brilliance is at management. I'm probably the opposite. I probably have some ability to innovate and create some programs and stuff. But as a manager, it takes tremendous effort. So I think you're right. Finding your skill set, your balance, and you can probably develop either skill set. But I think some people are just naturally gifted at management. Some people, like you said, are gifted at technician. That goes back to what we talked about, Sally, awareness. You know, I was voted the world's worst accountant when I was about 24. It's a noble career. It's a good profession. I was terrible. I was absolutely terrible. It drained me. I just wasn't meant to do it. The first time I saw the Myers-Briggs, I was 25, and it said, your type tends to never go into auditing or accounting. And I thought, I wish somebody had mailed this to me a few years back. It would have helped. So awareness changes everything. You know, so Robert, I agree with you. Figure out who you are, what your organization needs, and where you can best contribute. Yeah, agility. Yeah.
Can I, Robert, you know, you and I have had some conversations around some of this, and even going back to that enterprise or the different types that Greg was talking about earlier in terms of kind of the stages. And he mentioned something there of like not needing to be the one in charge. And I know this may be difficult for you, but can you share some of just your experiences the last few years? I feel like you've gone through a lot of transitions and a lot of things that have needed you to adapt, and maybe even ending with that phrase that you've put on your growth plan, and how that's been a bit of a mantra for you.
Okay, sure. You know, I guess when you're the top box guy, you feel like you've got the ultimate mantle of responsibility, as one of the persons in our leadership group framed it as. And there's certainly a lot of distractions, but you're trying to stick to the plan and make sure everyone knows, you know, what their roles are, and that the machine is running smoothly. I think when that becomes a point where either someone is rising up and is, you know, getting impatient, which was me at one point in my career, getting impatient with a top box person leading, and then I found myself in the same situation, and 10 years later, and even along the journey, and I got to thinking like, well, what if this person could actually do a better job than I'm doing and lead the company better at this point? So yeah, is that a fun thought to think about? No, it's not. Is that a thought that should be thought about? Yeah, probably should be. You know, if you're in charge of a company and what you want is the best for all the stakeholders, then you better be sure that the right person's in the top box. So the statement that's sort of been my guiding principle that Jared referred to was something that I have on my growth plan that Jared has us filling out every year. Before that, Henry Landis, who was leading our timeout group. So I keep in front of me, and I've told my people that I'm leading here, you know, we need to have a growth plan every year for everyone, even the board members. I'm asking for that. And then you need to put this in your sock drawer where you can find it throughout the year, because it's not just like some plan in January and then you never look at it again, but should look at it more often. So this quote that I can't say I can take credit for, but it's what I keep out in front of me: caring just as much as I let go of more and then dash trust but verify. So, you know, people say, well, if you're just going to like throw your hands up and yield to the next person leading, does that mean you don't care? Actually, I think that might mean that you could possibly care more, because if ultimately you're concerned about the best for the stakeholders, then I think this yielding is probably the best solution, especially if the persons who are now in the top box are held accountable, supported, you know, and all those other things that are important to have happen as well.
Jared, could we go back? Robert, great comments. Could we go back to the slide with the stages on it? Because Robert, I think, and I almost feel like we scripted this, though we didn't. So the catalyst level, so you hear Robert talking about letting go, that's not about me. You know, again, Jim Ethier has a great statement. He said, you don't let go when you're ready, you let go when your successor's ready. You know, to distill these three stages down, the expert, it's about me. The achiever, it's about us. The catalyst, it's about them. It's about the other people, that service. And you heard that with Robert's practice. So I want to commend you, and I think a great example of catalyst level thinking. You know, in my career, I was trained to be an accountant. Again, not a good one, but I was trained, you know, a lawyer. But when we become leaders, we're often not trained. So in some of our preparation, we talked about a leadership practice. So I'm going to make one comment, and then Robert, if it's okay, I'm going to throw the microphone to you to talk a little bit about your leadership practice. But, you know, the research in this model shows the top 10% of leaders tend to do three things. They tend to have a daily workout practice. They tend to have a daily reflective or meditation practice. And they tend to have a creative practice outside of work. I was pretty good at those first two. I am not creative, I'm innovative maybe. So my creative practice outside of work for the last 8 years has been gift giving. And I found that's helped my self-awareness and empathy, especially kids. I give a lot of gifts to kids who you can buy a kid a stick and you've made their day. So that'd be another best practice for your listeners, a workout regime, a reflection or meditation regime, and a creative practice outside of work. But things like feedback, courses, you know, leadership practice can mean a lot of different things, just like a workout to stay in shape. But Robert, if it's okay, would you comment on your practice, or, you know, that this isn't just a one-time thing? You said keep it in your sock drawer so you keep looking at it, right?
Right. I would say that, you know, I'm getting feedback from my wife. I know in the past that I would have not even dared to ask her how we're doing with a check-in. And I say that now because we've done some great work, you know, with marriage counseling, and have developed a mature relationship and love and respect for each other. I remember telling that to one of the people in my timeout group, and they said, you would do what? Like, you would just like let that go. It's like, why would you do a check-in with your wife or whatever? And so, yeah, who else am I willing to ask that question to? Am I willing to ask that question to my shareholder partners? Am I willing to ask that to my managers, to my pastor accountability partner? And I think, you know, I get why that's important, and I certainly don't do it every day, but I think it is a valuable piece that you're lifting out there, Greg. What else I do? Yeah, I have a creative side. I like to play guitar. I play on our worship team at church. And I do like to read a lot. My wife probably reads 3 books a week, so she thinks I look at my phone too much. So I'm reading like these little articles and whatnot. And like I was telling Greg before, when he sent me these 2 books to read up on to try to get familiar with where he's coming from, I feel like, you know, I've been very distracted this year with everything that's happened, and I certainly didn't stop my reading, but I was not able to focus on the longer story. And so I was challenged by Greg, got back into reading here this last week, and it's very good. I have a tendency to read towards like nonfiction and personal development. So as a discipline, I try to at least read half of my books on the fiction side, because, you know, I tend to sort of migrate back to that personal development curiosity that I have. Trying to think about other things that I do for leadership. Obviously, leadership in the timeout group's been very good. The one-on-one with Jared once a quarter that I do. Usually meet with my accountability partner once a week, although this COVID thing has sort of put that up on its head. With my boys and my daughters who are interested in this, I'm very engaged with them as well. So I can say that not everybody is really dissatisfied with where they're at in their leadership development. And I feel like also on my list here, my 2020 list, is the whole responsibility I have of mentoring. I guess you could say that I'm a pot stirrer too. Sometimes challenging people, you know, against the status quo. So I see that as a way that I can continue to develop my leadership to try to like stir it up in other people, make sure they're feeling challenged and engaged, that they're not just settling back for what's coming down the stream, you know what I mean? But it's like, well, you want to make your own way too here. So anyway, I'll stop talking.
Robert, I think it might be important for those who don't know you just to give a little bit of a sense of your context, you know, the roles that you had, your roles now, and you talked about the top box. How is that now? Talk about the executive summary.
Yep. When I was pretty much like got into it heavy after I was out of the country for a year doing voluntary service after high school, got into full-time work. I know Greg asked me, well, when did I start working? And I said, well, off the books, probably 10, sweeping the floors and emptying the trash, although that was not supposed to be like known. I remember painting a siding for my grandfather, and he actually paid me cash. And before that, my parents would just expect me to do chores, and I didn't really get an allowance that I remember. So I remember my grandfather, who was the founder of our company, paying me money to do work. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. You know, not only was I willing to do something, but I got paid for it. So yeah, got back here, you know, in 20, got right into the work, whatever the company needed, technician, learned refrigeration and a lot of other things, and then got into sales. Was very interested in early on, not because it came from Bergey's Electric's leadership, but Zig Ziglar, Peter Lowe. I took people from our company to some of those seminars, and just like the whole idea of personal development and growth was really not only important to me, but it was important to those who were around me. At least I felt it was. So maybe they went kind of like unwillingly in some ways just to put up with me, but I hope it, you know, some of it rubbed off on them. Then I became a shareholder when I was 35. My dad started divesting some of his shares, and that led to a whole situation of like, okay, so now that I'm a part owner, what does that mean? And got into a very complex and complicated situation, which went on for some time till we figured it all out, and not on our own. I would say Delaware Valley was very helpful in helping us get that figured out. And when I was 50, I became the president from my uncle. Before that, my other uncle was president for a short term. My dad was president for a longer term, and my grandfather, founder, was president for the beginning. And then so yeah, that was right in the dark days of the Great Recession that I took on that responsibility, and certainly felt like, wow, we did things differently than we ever did before, and that's what the times called for. So that was okay. I mean, I think you have to be willing to adapt. And then in when I turned 60, we created a new box at Bergey's Electric. So the president had always been the top box person before that. And we created a box of CEO, which my brother Ron became at that point. And so I became the board chair. Will retired from full-time work. I had chaired a board nonprofit camp up in the Poconos before that. So I felt like I had some really good experience there doing that. And yeah, it's been really good. I can say, you know, in some ways I didn't feel all of the stress because it's on my brother's shoulders, you know, as more so than even mine now. So do I care? Yes. As the board chair, I absolutely care. Do I need to like get all the sleepless nights, or can somebody else have some of them? Yeah. Somebody else is having some of them right now. So.
Greg, anything else you wanted to either comment about the leader manager?
Yeah, I think two comments. One is, you know, Robert, you see the courage, the ability to stretch, to try different things, even to bring a vulnerability. And what I like, and I think Sally, you and I have talked about this, that the personal and the professional, to the most part, can't be separated. Who you are at home is who you are at work. So if you're not working on both fronts, especially in a family business, you've got work to do. So I commend all the effort and lifelong learning that Robert talked about. I did want to at least mention, Sally, I don't think we discussed it much, is self-care. That right now, under all this stress, you know, it's interesting, more than half the people I'm coaching right now are women leading some big organizations. But the research shows women are more reluctant to give themselves permission for self-care. You know, I think especially mothers, if you'll forgive me, my 86-year-old mother says there's a special place in heaven for mothers. She never says where the dads go, but we'll talk about that next week. But I think self-care is no longer an option. You can't just keep muscling through this because it's going on week after week because there's ambient stress. So one thing I would say with compassion to all the leaders, make sure you're taking care of yourself. You don't have to be perfect. Some level of vulnerability. I mean, I had to help a leader ask for 2 days off just to sort of decompress and show that to everybody else. You know, my father said to me this week, we should all be working at about 80%. So a little more tolerance, a little more compassion, a little more support with one another, including yourself. Don't just muscle through this. You know, it'll come out some way, and probably not in a good way. Give yourself downtime, find a place to let things out. I have a client that calls me and she says, I just need to vent, and often for 10 to even 15 minutes, she just verbally explodes. So self-care would be another challenge I would offer to everyone.
Great point. Can we talk a little bit about the Rising Gen and about instilling the leadership qualities in the rising generation? I think this is so important.
You know, my 20 some years with the Next Gen every day on campus, where we would have coaching with them, they would do life plans. My general experience, there's exceptions, most Next Gen want to step up. They want to be credible. They just don't know how. And I think we go back to the framing. If the senior generation can frame, what's the invitation and expectations? What does this mean? Is this ownership just a gift? Am I supposed to do something with it? Is there a job invitation? If I don't work there, are you disappointed? So I think there's often, you know, I like the principles that Delaware Valley has. The older generation has to look at letting go. And so I think the example I use, maybe let them write a recommended family employment policy. Now, you don't have to accept all of it, but at least give them increasing leadership position. You know, one of the best clients I've had in 20 years, the three brothers who were the senior generation between age 60 and 70, they were willing to do everything first. They were willing to do the personality test, the feedback, the peer coaching. And that is so much more effective because then the next generation will do it. I think when there's an attitude of we got to fix these kids, I have never met in my life anybody that says, I'm really looking forward to being fixed. So you know, like Robert's doing the work. That brings a credibility to his kids when he talks to it. Everybody should be doing the work. Everybody should be improving, and you know, start with yourself. You know, one more thing I'll say is, and Robert, I think you even used the word credibility. Sally, you did too. I look at credibility in two ways: the external, Am I valid to other people? So, you know, if I own the Yankees and put my son at second base, though he's never played professional ball, that's, everybody knows that's not credible. The other side, and I found a gender difference, women are a little slower to give themselves credibility and confidence. Men sometimes give it to themselves a little too quickly. But internal credibility is, do I feel legitimate? I absolutely believe, you know, the essence of my book, When Your Parents Sign the Paycheck, is how do you get credibility, both types, and work on that. And I don't care if you're a billionaire, you cannot give your kid credibility. They have to earn it. So helping them feel legitimate, framing the invitation, role modeling the behavior first, because my experience has been the vast majority of the rising gen will step up, want to step up. They just need to know what that means.
Yeah, and I would say it is just so hard to grow up in a family business because in some ways you never leave home. And you know, you're under this magnifying glass and people still, you know, always see you as the boss's kid or some entitled. So it's very, very difficult. And also, Greg, would you see this as well? It's so hard to move like from this parent-child, you know, where the child, you know, is moving up and the parent is moving down. So you're really having that adult to adult connection, which is really reinventing the relationship.
It is, you know, in the major, we used to have the students interview their parents, and most students would say, I already know all this. We said, well, we're setting this up for you to interview them as adults. And I would say 90% of the time they heard a very different version of some of the family stories. And so you're right, that transition. And so, you know, there's exceptions, but my experience, I do think the outside experience is as important. And in the major, you had to go do an internship almost anywhere in the planet, but not your family. Because it just gives you, one, that feedback that maybe I'm legitimate. You know, because if you're working for your mom or dad, you don't know if people are just sucking up to you or resentful of you. And I think it also gives you a sense, if I had to, I could make it outside. So again, there are exceptions, but I found that outside experience is so validating. And you know, the rising gen often may have to lead that change. The parents may not know how to. And if stress, the best definition of stress I ever heard was responsibility without control. You know, if I, God forbid, put a gun to Jared's head and say, make it rain, that's stress, right? Often the rising gen have a lot of stress because they're starting to feel responsibility for things, but not control yet. So I love working with the rising gen. I love their passion. And it's hard. Like you said, I remember a student in class saying a police officer stopped her and said, I can't give you a ticket in this town, given who your family is. What a way to corrupt a young person. That kind of message that it's okay to be entitled. And there's nothing, I have never met a person that's entitled that has been happy. You know, it's the opposite of credibility. I think it erodes your soul. And almost every one of those people I've seen is struggling with some kind of over shopping, overspending, over drinking. So the worst thing you can do for your kid is create a sense of entitlement.
Great. Wow. And we could talk a lot more about rising gen, and maybe we will, but there's a good question here.
Sure.
I'm going to read this. How can you lead from below, especially when the founder is still an active member of the decision-making management? And when the founder is gone, how do you ensure change happens without losing sight of the original purpose or vision of the business?
Wow. Great question. Let me take the second part. I think one of the things I see in families is mistaking loyalty to the family for attachment to business practices. So you get grounded in the values, and those shouldn't change much or should change slowly. But, you know, if you have to go from automobiles to restaurants or something, I don't think that's disloyalty to the family. So separating out, change over here is probably good and that should happen quickly. Change over here on who we are. And that goes back to even the family enterprise mindset. The why probably won't change too often. It may evolve generationally. I think the other one, how do you manage or lead without power? That is a wonderful topic of managing up, as some people call it. And at its best, that's bringing influence, you know, that's leading without power, but it's sort of being a coach, holding up the mirror to person. You know, Joshua Nacht, who I know has done a great deal of work on what he calls family champions, where they're often family members who care, who aren't in positions of power, who are trying to influence change. I would say also resources like Delaware Valley or consultants, other consultants in the field. Doing it alone is often hard. Even in my own family, we had to bring in a consultant because I couldn't do both roles. I'm still Greg, the middle child, the whatever. So get help, read up on the literature, even some of the managing up information. Harvard Business Review has a great book on that that's helpful.
Great responses. And I would add to that, one of the things that we often encourage is that the Rising Gen make proposals. They come together as a team and they make a proposal up. That way it's working at their leadership together, but then, the leading generation does have that.
So Robert, want to speak? If I can just add a sentence. Yeah, my firm, I think, does that as much as anybody I know, is we are constantly saying, let the next gen recommend something that they can live with. You get to approve it, but let's start practicing you letting go now. So yeah, great minds think alike. Robert, I interrupted you.
No, you didn't interrupt me. I just was going to say, that word influence is huge. And you mentioned it there, Greg. Somebody asked me the other day, one of my employees said they wanted to talk about something, and it was, a situation. And I said, well, just so that you know, I'm not really going to say it. This is going to get decided one way or the other, but I am an influencer. So it's probably good that you came and talked to me. So I think there's definitely a place for an influencing person to help guide a company or a family. And, we shouldn't be shy about that. So if the influencer is always going to be critiquing everything, that's an influencer, I guess. But, after a while, you're going to throw that baby out with bathwater. And I think, I want to be an influencer. That's all about creating positive change and holding people accountable and really be the voice that is welcomed. Mostly they might not like everything I have to say, and as decisions get made, but that's how I want to look at myself as an influencer.
Great points, Robert. And I'd also like to add a shout out here for the first round draft picks. We talked about, Greg, you mentioned family champions, great resources to the family. And I know that you and we use them appropriately, bring them into the situation so they can have a voice and external, again, feedback and influence, but doing it in the correct way with a lot of discernment instead of, really making them invisible.
I have a question, Greg. We're just thinking about the Rising Gen, and I know it's along a lot of some of the folks in my peer group. So we just did an exercise because we're reading Emotional Agility and talking about self-acceptance. So we talk about feedback in terms of having people tell you the things that are wrong with you. But I found a lot of Rising Gen, they have trouble with people telling them things that are right. And we did this exercise where I said on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you fit on self-acceptance? How hard are you on yourself? And we graded, and no one gave themselves above a 4. And it was interesting because then I had everyone grade the other people in the group in terms of how well they think they're doing, their peers. And they gave everyone like a 7 or an 8. And we talked about why that might be. And to a person, all of them said, well, in our family and in our business, there wasn't a lot of affirmation growing up. We didn't hear, there was this fear of affirming each other. And, so it's like almost like you're going to create lazy people if you affirm them and accept them and that sort of thing. So do you have some thoughts on how to help Rising Gen have a healthy sense of self, not one that's entitled, but one that's maybe not too far down on that scale?
Great question. I have utter passion for what you said. In my family, Irish Catholic, the saying was they'll get a big head, which turned out to be true in my case physically, but that's a different topic. In my coaching, what I find is people are more reluctant to accept their strengths. It's amazing. To go back to the feedback, CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership, recommends at least 4 pieces of positive to every one critical. A client of mine had Ken Blanchard in. Ken Blanchard has written 50 books on leadership. They said, Ken, if you could give one piece of advice, he said, catch people doing something right. Okay, so feedback should not be code for I get to criticize you. If every time I walk down the hall to Sally's office, she just critiques me, I'm not going to walk down the hall anymore. Empower people. I remember a woman I worked with was just utterly brilliant with people. And she said, yeah, but that's easy for me. I think we also have this weird notion, if it's suffering, that's work. But if it's easy, it doesn't count. Imagine empowering the people you're working with, something they're good at and like and adds value to do more of. So yeah, absolutely. And like you, Jared, I find people are so hard on themselves. It's sort of like, I won this award in Sweden, but when I walked up to get the award, I tripped. And you're like, well, what was the award? Well, it was a Nobel Peace Prize. And you're like, well, maybe we should focus on that a little more. So absolutely. Yes. Sally, if we have time, I'd like to make one more comment.
Yes.
Jared, could we go back to the stages slide just one more time? Yeah, give people positive feedback. So we went through these stages. I want to make a quote. I'll probably get a little wrong, so I'm paraphrasing. But a thought leader says an organization's culture probably can't evolve beyond the capacity of its leaders. So if the leaders are experts, that's probably going to be all the culture gets to. So one, that's another reason to evolve yourself. But two, and Sally, if you want, I have a short description of this. It would be wonderful for everybody listening to think, what's the culture of our family at which stage? Are we experts where everybody has to be right? Are we achievers where we think strategically and we're willing to get buy-in from other people? Or do we have this catalyst that's truly about growth and development, as Robert had talked about? My hunch is, especially if you're part of Delaware Valley, both you're evolving, you have a growth mindset, and you've evolved. So there may be a lot of families that feel like they have a catalyst culture. But if culture is so important, if culture may be your most important asset, what are you investing in to evolve it?
Great points. Yeah. Well, Greg or Robert, do either of you have other points or thoughts or questions that you'd like to share?
Robert, I always have something to say, so I'll let you go first if you want to jump in.
Well, what can I say? I think Greg is, digging deep into some of these areas that maybe we just would rather stay busy with. The next task, things like that are easy to just fall into and just feel like, I've heard somebody say you can almost become intoxicated on the task. It's just like you're doing the next thing and you really feel at the end of the day, wow, you really took care of stuff today. Yeah, you did, but did you do the most important things that day? Are you really caring deeply about other people? And I got to say, in our company, I was going to mention this, I've seen in the last couple of months with this COVID event that we're actually conversing with each other like, well, how was your weekend? And more so than just like, okay, trying to be polite, how was your weekend? But really genuinely giving a pause and letting somebody, share. So I think we got this great COVID virus, which is a terrible thing, has hopefully challenged us that we'll never be the same in some ways. Even if we get back to office work and every staff member's here instead of working off site and all of that, and we long for the days that we can be, together again in a company meeting in one room and our church gathered and all that. Yeah, we long for those days. But I just think that there's some things that happened here. Even for leaders to, instead of feeling like they've got to be the rock, like the unwavering rock in all of this situation, what are people going to think if they hear me say, wow, I don't know what to even think about tomorrow because I don't even know about the next hour? What if you said that out loud to somebody? Would that be okay as a leader to say that?
Good
Sally,
point.
so in the resources, we have Brene Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability. And, she's worked with such touchy-feely groups as the Pentagon and the Navy SEALs. So it's a highly entertaining but really insightful, talking about just what Robert said. I'd like to leave everybody with this thought that as Robert said, I think this virus has given us a silver lining of we're bringing our hearts and guts and souls into work in a way maybe most of us never have. And this work that I talk about, the development, and there's different paths. I've seen people transform. You know, one young man came to me and said, I don't need this touchy-feely stuff. I just want to be a better broker. And after the first EMBA course, he said, you know what I never, ever want to do again in my life is be a broker. I've seen people confront major issues in their family and transform the family. So that staying busy is seductive. It feels like you're getting something done, but especially of a leader. You know, I worked with a woman who ran $1 billion organization. She said, my job is not to get the task done, it's to think. And, you know, obviously there are tasks she has to get done, but I mean, pulling back and thinking, where is this ship going and who am I and how do I help the people that are on this ship takes time. Intimacy takes time. And I think the one silver lining of this is we see time a little differently than we used to. So invest in yourself, invest in other people, bring your heart, gut, and soul into this and live a better life, you know.
Love it. Couldn't affirm that more. And Greg, you know, we are human beings, not human doings. So attending to that internal work, you know, it's often we have a handout, you know, it's kind of below the waterline. That work is so incredibly important. Well, I think, Jared, you could pull up our action step. We want to make sure that we leave you. Greg has been referring to a handout or a packet that Beth might be sending around this very moment, or at least towards the end of our time together. Well, before I do action steps, Greg, do you want to say anything about your resource?
Just real quickly, the first two are my book. The next one is a great book on managing stress, which I'm a big fan of. The fourth one is the feedback booklet that you can find online that's helpful. A couple on leadership that are good. The next to last bullet point is the TED Talk by Brene Brown. It's about 10 minutes long. It's brilliant. And I also think Simon Sinek is very good. So some of those are a little more snackable, digestible, those TED Talks. And if I can help anybody, if you want to learn more about this, reach out to me. I can send you more resources.
And this is another way you're a kindred spirit with us, Greg. Last year, our theme book was the Simon Sinek Why book, and the year before that, it was Daring Greatly from Brene.
Oh, great. Great minds.
Spot on. So if we go to the next action step, so probably emailing you all now, 3-question evaluation. If you could fill that out, that's extremely helpful for us as we continue to plan webinars and hopefully get back to our face-to-face forums. And then Beth will also be including Greg's packet. It's a wonderful packet, multi-pages of resources and assessment and really good stuff. And then secondly here, visit our website for, if you want the slides, you can print them out in the recording, and we'll also have Greg's handouts on that. And then here is Greg's website and also his emails. He said he's inviting your comments and your connections with him. And as a member, you can also visit one of our leadership labs. As Jared said earlier, we have 3 of them now. We'll be starting some additional ones. They're monthly meetings, and they also include one-to-one coaching. So I lead the women's group, and Jared leads the Rising Gen and also our CEO group, which the old name was called Timeout, right, Robert? That's Henry called it when he started, so we still call it that. And then our next webinar is going to be next Wednesday, May 20, Creating a Return to Work Plan. And that's with Jeff Green, one of our EDU sponsors. So really he's going to talk about how to transition employees back into the workplace, the health and safety considerations, what risks to watch out for, and how to communicate. So I do see there's another question here. Let me see what this is. Okay, this is about the handouts. And yes, I did just review. You will all be getting them. So a huge and hearty thank you, Greg, to you and to Robert for joining us, for contributing to the learning community. We're always learning together. So thank you very much. And any other comments before I close?
Just thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you. And love to you all. Hugs. Enjoy the rest of the week.